I was standing in my driveway in Scottsdale, Arizona, staring at the certified letter in my hand when I realized my quiet suburban life was about to become a constitutional battleground. The letter from the Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association accused me of violating community standards with my religious display, and they were demanding I remove it within 72 hours or face daily fines of $100. My hands shook slightly as I read the words again, because what they were calling a violation was actually a modest nativity scene I had set up in my front yard for the Christmas season, along with a simple wooden cross and a banner that read, "He is risen," that I had kept up year-round on my porch. My name is Thomas Crawford, and I had lived in this pleasant neighborhood for 5 years without any issues. I worked as an accountant for a mid-sized firm in downtown Phoenix, kept my lawn immaculate, paid my HOA dues on time, and generally kept to myself. I was not the type to cause trouble or seek attention. My faith was important to me, but I had never been pushy about it with my neighbors. The nativity scene was tasteful, not one of those enormous inflatable displays that lit up the entire street. It consisted of a few wooden figures, maybe 3 feet tall, arranged in a small stable structure I had built myself. The cross on my porch was simple cedar wood, about 2 feet high, mounted beside my front door. Nothing excessive, nothing garish, just quiet expressions of my Christian faith. The letter was signed by Patricia Hennigan, the president of the Sunset Ridge HOA board. I knew Patricia by sight, a woman in her mid-50s with perfectly styled blonde hair that never seemed to move in the wind, and a wardrobe that consisted entirely of pastel pantsuits. She drove a white Lexus SUV and had a habit of walking the neighborhood with a clipboard, presumably looking for violations. I had seen her plenty of times, but had never had a real conversation with her beyond polite waves. I went inside my house and sat down at my kitchen table, reading through the letter more carefully. They cited Section 14.7 of the HOA Covenant, which apparently prohibited displays of a religious, political, or otherwise controversial nature that may offend other residents or detract from the uniform aesthetic of the community. I had never really studied the HOA rules that carefully when I bought the house, which I now realized was a mistake. I had signed the documents along with everything else at closing, but honestly, who reads every word of those things? My first instinct was to just take everything down and avoid the conflict. I had never been one for confrontation, and the idea of daily fines adding up was genuinely scary. But as I sat there, something inside me resisted that impulse. This was not about being stubborn or making a point for the sake of it. This was about my faith, about my First Amendment right to express my religious beliefs on my own property. I had not moved into some restrictive community with gates and guards. This was a regular suburban neighborhood with an HOA that handled basic maintenance of common areas and enforced reasonable standards about lawn care and exterior paint colors. I decided to call my friend Michael that evening. We had gone to law school together at Arizona State University, though I had ended up going into accounting instead of practicing law. Michael, however, had become a civil rights attorney and had made a name for himself handling First Amendment cases. We met for coffee sometimes, and I knew he would give me honest advice. "Tom, this is exactly the kind of case that drives me crazy," Michael said when I explained the situation over the phone. "HOAs think they can override constitutional rights with their little covenants, but they are wrong. Dead wrong. The First Amendment protects religious expression, and that includes religious displays on private property." "But I signed the HOA agreement," I said. Does not that mean I agreed to their rules? Signing an HOA covenant does not mean you waive your constitutional rights, Michael explained. There are limits to what HOAs can enforce. They cannot ban religious displays entirely. There was a federal law passed back in 2000 called the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act, RLUIPA for short, that specifically protects religious expression. And beyond that, the First Amendment itself is the ultimate protection. These people are way out of line. So what should I do? First, do not take anything down. Second, send them a response letter explaining that you are exercising your First Amendment rights and that their rule is unconstitutional. Third, if they push back, let me know and I will represent you. This is the kind of case I love to take on, and honestly, Tom, I would probably do it pro bono just because it makes me angry when HOAs pull this stuff. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. Having Michael in my corner changed everything. That night, I drafted a response letter to Patricia Hennigan and the HOA board. I kept it polite but firm, explaining that my religious display was protected by the First Amendment and federal law, and that I would not be removing it. I cited RLUIPA and included some basic legal language that Michael had helped me with over the phone. I sent it certified mail the next morning. 3 days later, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was less polite. It informed me that I was officially in violation of the community covenants, that daily fines of $100 would begin accruing immediately, and that if I did not comply within 30 days, they would pursue legal action to force compliance and place a lien on my property for the unpaid fines. The letter also mentioned that my disregard for community standards was creating tension among neighbors and that several residents had complained about my display. That last part stung a bit. I had always gotten along fine with my neighbors. Who had complained? I thought about the older couple next door, the Hendersons, who had always been friendly. The family across the street with 3 young kids who I had helped when their car battery died last winter. The retired veteran 2 houses down who I chatted with sometimes about sports. Had any of them actually complained, or was Patricia just making that up? I called Michael immediately and read him the new letter. He sighed heavily. Okay, now they are threatening your property. This is serious and they are way over the line. I am going to draft a formal legal response and represent you officially. We will send them a letter making it crystal clear that what they are doing is illegal, and that if they continue, we will sue them for violating your civil rights. Trust me, Tom, HOAs back down fast when they realize they are actually going to face a real legal challenge. Over the next week, Michael put together a comprehensive legal response. It was 8 pages long and cited numerous cases where courts had ruled in favor of homeowners' rights to religious expression. He pointed out that the HOA's blanket ban on religious displays was unconstitutional, that selective enforcement of such rules had been struck down repeatedly, and that threatening liens and legal action constituted harassment and infringement of civil rights. He also demanded that the HOA immediately cease and desist from assessing fines, and that they provide a written apology acknowledging the violation of my rights. We sent the letter to Patricia Hennigan, the entire HOA board, and the management company that the HOA used for administrative services. Michael also sent a copy to the HOA's attorney, whose name was listed on their previous correspondence. The response came faster than I expected. Within 4 days, I received a phone call from someone named Gary Winters, who identified himself as the HOA's legal counsel. He asked if we could have a meeting to discuss the situation. Mr. Crawford, I have reviewed your attorney's letter, and I have also reviewed the HOA covenants in question. I want to be frank with you. I advised the board that pursuing this matter would be ill-advised, but they insisted on sending those initial letters without consulting me. Now that I am involved, I think we can resolve this quickly. What exactly are you proposing? I asked. I am proposing that the HOA withdraw all fines, acknowledge that your display is protected expression, and we all move on. I do not want this to become a federal case, literally. My attorney is requesting a public apology, I said. There was a pause. Let me discuss that with the board. But I think we can work something out. I felt a surge of vindication, but Michael cautioned me not to celebrate too early when I told him about the call. They are trying to make this go away quietly, he said. And that is fine, but we need to make sure they actually follow through. Do not agree to anything until we have it in writing, and make sure that public apology is part of it. These HOAs need to learn that they cannot just bully people and then quietly back down when challenged. There needs to be accountability. 2 weeks went by with negotiations happening mostly between Michael and Gary Winters. During that time, something interesting happened. I started hearing from neighbors. First, it was Don Henderson from next door. He knocked on my door one evening looking uncomfortable. "Tom, I just wanted you to know that Patricia came around asking if we had any problems with your nativity scene. I told her absolutely not, that we thought it was lovely. I am Catholic myself, and Barbara and I have always appreciated that you are open about your faith." I do not know who complained, if anyone actually did, but it was not us. Then it was Jennifer Martinez from across the street. She stopped me while I was getting my mail. "Hey Tom, I heard about the HOA thing. That is complete garbage. My kids love your nativity scene. We are not super religious ourselves, but we think it is nice that you put that up. It reminds the kids what the season is really about, you know. If you need anyone to speak up for you, let me know." Over the next several days, I heard similar sentiments from at least a dozen neighbors. It became clear that Patricia had either exaggerated the complaints or had possibly fabricated them entirely. A few people mentioned that Patricia had a history of using anonymous complaints to justify her personal crusades against things she did not like in the neighborhood. One neighbor, an older gentleman named Frank Russo who lived 3 streets over, told me something particularly interesting. Patricia tried this same thing about 8 years ago with a family who put up a large menorah during Hanukkah. She said it was too bright and violated some aesthetic rule. The family ended up moving rather than fighting it, which I always felt bad about. It is good that you are standing your ground. Someone needs to put her in her place. This information troubled me deeply. If Patricia had a pattern of targeting religious displays, that made this even more clearly a violation of civil rights. I relayed all of this to Michael. That is gold, Tom. If we can document a pattern of discriminatory behavior against religious expression, that strengthens the case enormously. See if Frank would be willing to give a written statement about what happened with the other family. Frank agreed immediately. He even still had some old HOA meeting minutes from around that time that referenced the menorah dispute. Michael collected statements from several of my neighbors attesting that they had no problem with my display, and that Patricia had solicited complaints from them. Finally, nearly a month after the original letter, we reached an agreement. The HOA would withdraw all fines, formally acknowledge that my religious display was protected expression, and most importantly, issue a public apology. The apology would be published in the monthly HOA newsletter and posted on the community website. Additionally, the HOA would revise their covenants to explicitly acknowledge that religious displays were protected and could not be prohibited. I thought that would be the end of it, but Patricia Hennigan had other ideas. The day before the apology was supposed to be published, I received an angry phone call from her directly. "Mr. Crawford, I want you to know that I personally think this entire situation is ridiculous. You have created unnecessary conflict in this community, and you have cost the HOA thousands of dollars in legal fees, which, by the way, comes out of everyone's dues. I hope you are proud of yourself." I was so shocked by her aggressive tone that I barely knew how to respond. "Patricia, I did not create this conflict. You sent me a letter threatening to fine me for expressing my religious beliefs. All I did was stand up for my constitutional rights. Your religious display is tacky and divisive. Several residents have told me privately that they find it offensive, but they are afraid to say so publicly now because you have made yourself into some kind of martyr." "Who specifically has complained?" I asked, "because I have talked to dozens of neighbors and they all support what I am doing." "I am not required to disclose that information," she snapped. "But mark my words, Mr. Crawford, I will be watching your property closely. If you violate any other covenant, even a blade of grass too long, you will be hearing from me." She hung up before I could respond. I immediately called Michael and told him about the conversation. "That was incredibly stupid of her," Michael said. "She just made a threatening phone call to you the day before she is supposed to issue a public apology. Let me reach out to Gary Winters and make sure he knows about this." Patricia is creating liability for the entire HOA. Apparently, Michael's call to Gary Winters had an effect, because the next morning I received an apologetic email from Gary explaining that Patricia had acted without authorization, and that the board was counseling her on appropriate conduct. The apology was published as scheduled. The HOA newsletter came out on a Saturday. The apology was printed on the front page, which I had not expected. It read, "The Sunset Ridge Homeowners Association wishes to apologize to Thomas Crawford for improperly attempting to restrict his First Amendment right to religious expression. Mr. Crawford's religious display is protected by both the United States Constitution and federal law, including the Religious Land Use and Institutionalized Persons Act. The HOA acknowledges that our previous communications violated Mr. Crawford's rights, and we have withdrawn all fines and penalties. We are revising our community covenants to ensure that religious expression is properly protected going forward. The HOA is committed to respecting the constitutional rights of all residents." It was signed by the entire HOA board, including Patricia Hennigan, though I could only imagine how much she hated putting her name on that. The response from the community was overwhelmingly positive. I received dozens of emails and messages from neighbors congratulating me. Several people mentioned that they had felt intimidated by the HOA in the past over various petty issues and were glad to see someone finally stand up to them. But there was also a small minority of negative responses. I received 2 anonymous letters, clearly from people in the neighborhood, criticizing me for making trouble and costing everyone money. One of them included a particularly nasty accusation that I was using religion as an excuse to be a nuisance, which hurt more than I wanted to admit. I tried to focus on the positive. Michael was elated with the outcome and suggested we submit the case details to some civil rights organizations as an example of successful First Amendment advocacy. I declined, not wanting to extend the spotlight any longer than necessary. I just wanted to get back to my normal life. For a few weeks, things were quiet. I kept my nativity scene up through Christmas, then took it down in early January as I normally would. The cross and the banner on my porch remained as they always had. I went about my daily routine, work and home and occasional dinners with friends, trying not to think about the HOA drama. Then February rolled around, and I received another letter from the HOA. This time it accused me of having an unauthorized vehicle parked in my driveway. The vehicle in question was my brother's truck, which he had left at my house for a few days while he was out of town for work. According to the letter, commercial vehicles were not allowed to be parked in driveways overnight, and my brother's truck had a small company logo on the door, making it a commercial vehicle. I could not believe it. After everything that had happened, Patricia was actually going to try this again with some petty technicality. I called Michael, who laughed when I explained the situation. "She is retaliating against you. This is textbook retaliation, and it is illegal. Let me send another letter, but Tom, I think we need to consider taking this further. This woman is not going to stop, and the HOA needs to remove her from the board before she creates even more liability for them." Michael sent a strongly worded letter pointing out that the timing of this new violation notice, coming shortly after the religious display dispute, suggested retaliation, which was itself a civil rights violation. He also pointed out that the commercial vehicle rule, as written in the HOA covenants, applied only to vehicles over a certain size and weight, and my brother's truck did not meet those specifications. This time, Gary Winters called me directly. "Mr. Crawford, I want to apologize again. I have reviewed the situation, and you are correct that your brother's vehicle does not violate the covenant as written. I have also spoken with the HOA board about the pattern of behavior here, and I want you to know that steps are being taken to address it." "What does that mean exactly?" I asked. "I cannot go into details about internal board matters, but I can tell you that there have been discussions about board leadership and whether the current structure is serving the community well. I hope you will not need to hear from me again about these matters." I appreciated his candor, but I remained skeptical. Sure enough, about a week later, I saw Patricia walking through the neighborhood with her clipboard again. She made a point of walking very slowly past my house, clearly inspecting every detail of my property. I watched her from my window and saw her taking photographs of my front yard with her phone. That afternoon, I received an email from Patricia directly, not from the HOA's official management company email. She informed me that my front yard landscaping was not consistent with community standards because I had allowed some weeds to grow in the flower bed near my mailbox. She demanded that I address this within 48 hours. I went outside and looked at the area she was referring to. There were maybe 3 or 4 small weeds, the kind that pop up after rain no matter how well you maintain your yard. Every house on the street probably had similar weeds. This was absurd. I did not even bother calling Michael this time. I simply pulled the weeds, took photographs showing the clean flower bed, and sent them to Patricia with a polite email confirming that I had addressed her concern. I also sent a copy to Gary Winters with a note saying, "This is becoming harassment." Gary responded within an hour. "Agreed. I am addressing this today." That evening, I received a phone call from another member of the HOA board, a man named Richard Kellerman, who I had met a few times at community events. He sounded embarrassed. "Tom, I want to apologize for what has been happening. Several of us on the board have become increasingly concerned about Patricia's behavior, not just toward you but in general. She has been using her position to pursue personal vendettas, and it is not appropriate. We are going to be calling for a special meeting to discuss board leadership." "I appreciate you telling me that," I said. "I do not want to be in constant conflict with the HOA. I just want to live my life and be left alone." "I understand completely, and for what it is worth, I think your nativity scene was beautiful, My wife and I enjoyed seeing it during the holidays. The special HOA board meeting was scheduled for 2 weeks later. It was open to all residents, and I decided to attend, partly out of curiosity and partly because Michael suggested it would be good for the board to see community support for my position. The meeting was held at the community clubhouse on a Thursday evening. I arrived about 10 minutes early and was surprised to find the room already nearly full. Apparently word had spread about the purpose of the meeting, and a lot of residents wanted to be there. Patricia sat at a table at the front of the room with the 4 other board members. She looked tense and angry, her jaw set in a hard line. When she saw me enter, her eyes narrowed, but she did not say anything. Richard Kellerman called the meeting to order and explained that the board had called this special session to address concerns about board governance and leadership. He kept his language diplomatic, but the tension in the room was obvious. Then he opened the floor for public comment, and that was when things got interesting. The first person to speak was Frank Russo, the older gentleman who had told me about the menorah incident years earlier. He stood up and addressed the board directly. I have lived in this community for 23 years, and I have never been more disappointed in HOA leadership than I am right now. Patricia Hennigan has repeatedly overstepped her authority and has used her position to bully residents who do not conform to her personal preferences. The situation with Tom Crawford is just the latest example. Before him, it was a family with a menorah, and before that, I remember disputes over yard decorations, holiday lights, and even the color of someone's mailbox. This needs to stop. Several people applauded. Patricia's face turned red, but she remained silent. The next speaker was Jennifer Martinez, my neighbor from across the street. She was more emotional, her voice shaking slightly. My family loves this neighborhood, but we have been seriously considering moving because of the hostile environment the HOA has created. We should not have to live in fear of being fined or harassed over minor things. Tom Crawford has been nothing but a good neighbor, and what happened to him was wrong. If the board does not make changes, I think a lot of families are going to start leaving, and property values are going to suffer. One after another, residents stood up and voiced similar concerns. Some spoke specifically about my situation, while others raised different examples of what they saw as Patricia's overly aggressive enforcement of rules. A few people defended Patricia, arguing that someone needed to maintain standards in the community, but they were clearly in the minority. Finally, Patricia herself asked to speak. She stood up, her hands trembling slightly, and addressed the crowd. I have dedicated 5 years of my life to serving this community as HOA president. I have volunteered countless hours to keep this neighborhood beautiful and maintain property values. If people think I am too strict, maybe they should try doing this job themselves and see how hard it is to deal with residents who think the rules do not apply to them. I stand by every decision I have made, including the decision to address Mr. Crawford's display, which I believed in good faith violated our covenants. But you were wrong, someone called out from the audience, and instead of admitting it, you have been harassing him ever since. Patricia's face flushed darker. I have not been harassing anyone. I have been enforcing the rules fairly and consistently. Then why is Tom the only person who has gotten violation notices for weeds in his flower bed when half the neighborhood has weeds right now? Another voice challenged. The meeting devolved into crosstalk and arguments for a few minutes, until Richard Kellerman called for order. He then proposed a motion for the board to vote on Patricia's continued service as president. The motion passed 3-1, with only Patricia herself voting against it. She was removed as president, though she remained on the board as a regular member. Richard was elected the new president. Patricia gathered her things and walked out of the meeting without another word, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. I almost felt sorry for her, but then I remembered the stress and anxiety she had caused me over something as simple as expressing my faith. After the meeting, dozens of people came up to me to shake my hand and thank me for standing up to the HOA. It was overwhelming and honestly a bit uncomfortable. I had never wanted to be the center of attention or to be seen as some kind of crusader. I just wanted to put up a nativity scene and be left alone. In the weeks following the meeting, the atmosphere in the neighborhood changed noticeably. The new board leadership under Richard Kellerman was much more reasonable and focused on actual community concerns rather than petty enforcement of aesthetic rules. They followed through on revising the HOA covenants to explicitly protect religious expression, political speech, and other First Amendment rights. The new language made it clear that while the HOA could enforce reasonable standards about property maintenance and safety, they could not restrict expression based on content or viewpoint. Patricia remained on the board but was notably quiet at meetings. I heard from neighbors that she was considering resigning entirely and might even be planning to move out of the neighborhood. I did not know if that was true, and I tried not to dwell on it. I held no personal animosity toward her, even though she had made my life difficult. I just hoped she would learn from the experience. In April, something unexpected happened. I received an email from a reporter at the Arizona Republic, the major newspaper in Phoenix. Someone had tipped them off about my case, and they wanted to do a story about HOA overreach and First Amendment rights. I was hesitant at first, not wanting to reopen the whole situation publicly, but Michael encouraged me to do it. This is bigger than just you, Tom. There are probably thousands of people dealing with similar situations with their HOAs, and they need to know they have rights. Your story could help a lot of people. I agreed to the interview, and the story ran in late April. It was actually a very well-written piece that focused on the legal issues and the broader problem of HOAs overstepping their authority. The reporter interviewed me, Michael, and several of my neighbors, and even got a brief comment from Richard Kellerman about how the HOA had learned from the situation and made policy changes. The story got picked up by several other media outlets and even went somewhat viral on social media. My email inbox and voicemail filled up with messages from people around the country sharing their own HOA horror stories and thanking me for standing up for my rights. It was gratifying but also exhausting. One email in particular stood out. It was from the family Frank Russo had mentioned, the ones who had been pressured about their menorah years earlier. They had moved to a different neighborhood but still had friends in Sunset Ridge who had sent them the article. They thanked me for doing what they had not been able to do, and said they wished they had fought back instead of just moving. That email made me realize how important it had been to stand my ground. It was not just about me or my nativity scene. It was about the principle that people should not have to sacrifice their fundamental rights just because they live in an HOA community. By summer, life had returned to normal. The drama had faded, and I was just another resident of Sunset Ridge again. My relationship with my neighbors was stronger than ever, though. The whole experience had brought the community together in an unexpected way, with people who had previously just waved at each other now actually knowing each other's names and looking out for each other. I kept my religious displays up, rotating them with the seasons. A small cross and Easter banner in the spring, a simple God Bless America flag near the 4th of July, and of course, the nativity scene came back out in December. No one said a word of complaint. In fact, several neighbors told me they appreciated the displays. Patricia Hennigan did eventually resign from the HOA board in September. I heard she was moving to a different state to be closer to family, though I never confirmed that directly. The day I saw the moving truck in front of her house, I felt a complex mix of emotions. I did not celebrate her leaving because I did not think she was a bad person, just someone who had let a little bit of power go to her head and who had been unable to admit when she was wrong. The following December, something beautiful happened. As I was setting up my nativity scene in the front yard, several of my neighbors came over to help. Jennifer Martinez brought her kids, who were excited to help arrange the figures. Don and Barbara Henderson brought some lights to string around the display. Frank Russo showed up with a wooden star he had made in his workshop to go on top of the stable structure. As we worked together in the cool December evening, putting up this simple expression of faith that had caused so much conflict a year earlier, I felt a profound sense of peace. The struggle had been worth it. Standing up for my rights had not only protected my own freedom, but had also helped create a stronger, more connected community. The nativity scene looked beautiful when we finished, better than it ever had before. We all stood back to admire our work, and Jennifer's youngest daughter, who was maybe 5 years old, tugged on my sleeve. "Mr. Crawford, I think this is the prettiest one on the whole street." "Thank you, sweetie," I said, smiling down at her. That night, I received a text message from Michael. "Saw the picture Jennifer posted on Facebook of your nativity scene. Looks great. Proud of you, buddy. You did good." I texted back a simple thank you, but what I was really feeling was gratitude. Gratitude for friends like Michael who had stood by me and given me the courage to fight back. Gratitude for neighbors who had supported me even when it might have been easier to stay silent. And gratitude for living in a country where the First Amendment protected my right to express my faith, even when people in positions of petty authority tried to stop me. The legal bills had been minimal, since Michael had mostly worked pro bono, but I insisted on paying him something. He refused money, but asked if I would be willing to be a reference case for a guide he was putting together for homeowners dealing with similar HOA issues. I agreed immediately. Over the next few months, Michael put together a comprehensive guide outlining homeowners' First Amendment rights in HOA communities, what laws protect religious expression, and how to respond if an HOA tries to restrict protected speech. He cited my case as a primary example and included copies of the legal correspondence as templates people could adapt for their own situations. The guide was made available for free online and was downloaded thousands of times in the first few months. I started getting occasional emails from people who had read the guide and used it to successfully defend their own rights against HOA overreach. A woman in Colorado had been threatened with fines for flying a Christian flag in her yard. A family in Texas had been told to remove a Buddha statue from their front garden. A Jewish family in Florida had been ordered to take down their mezuzah from their doorpost. In each case, armed with information about their legal rights and template letters from Michael's guide, they had been able to get their HOAs to back down. These stories reminded me that what had felt like a purely personal struggle had actually been part of something much larger. HOAs across the country were increasingly trying to control every aspect of homeowners' lives, and many people did not realize they had legal protections against the most egregious overreach. In early spring of the following year, I was invited to speak on a panel at a property rights conference in Phoenix. I was nervous about public speaking, but Michael convinced me it would be valuable to share my experience in person. The panel was titled HOA Overreach and Constitutional Rights, and it included attorneys, lawmakers, and other homeowners who had faced similar issues. I told my story to an audience of about 200 people, keeping it concise and focusing on the key lessons I had learned. Afterward, during the question and answer session, a woman in the audience raised her hand. "Mr. Crawford, do you have any regrets about how you handled the situation? Is there anything you would have done differently?" I thought about it for a moment before answering. Honestly, my only regret is that I did not know my rights better from the beginning. If I had understood the First Amendment protections and RLUIPA when I first got that letter, I might have been able to resolve things more quickly. That is why education is so important. Homeowners need to know what their HOAs can and cannot legally do. Another person asked if I had any advice for people currently dealing with HOA disputes. "Document everything," I said. "Save every letter, every email, every conversation. Take photos and keep records. And do not be afraid to get legal help. A lot of attorneys, like my friend Michael here, will take these cases pro bono or at reduced rates because they care about protecting constitutional rights. You do not have to face an HOA alone." The response to the panel was overwhelmingly positive, and afterward, several people came up to thank me personally and share their own stories. One man told me his HOA had tried to ban him from having Bible study groups at his house, claiming they violated rules about commercial activity. He had successfully fought back using similar legal arguments to mine. These conversations reinforced my belief that what I had gone through mattered beyond just my own situation. It was part of a bigger conversation about property rights, freedom of expression, and the proper limits of HOA authority. As summer approached, the Sunset Ridge HOA held its annual meeting to elect board members and discuss community business. The meeting was far better attended than in previous years, with residents clearly more engaged after all the drama. Richard Kellerman was re-elected as president, and the board approved several measures to make HOA governance more transparent and accountable, including monthly town halls where residents could raise concerns and ask questions. During the meeting, Richard made a point of recognizing me publicly. "I want to thank Tom Crawford for his role in helping this community grow and improve. The situation we went through last year was difficult, but it ultimately made us better. We learned important lessons about respecting individual rights while still maintaining community standards." Tom showed courage in standing up for his beliefs, and we are all better off because of it. The room erupted in applause, and I felt my face flush with embarrassment. I had never sought recognition or praise. I had just wanted to keep my nativity scene up. But I appreciated the sentiment, and I was glad the community had learned from the experience. That fall, I received surprising news. Patricia Hennigan had written me a letter. It was not sent through the HOA or any official channel, just a personal letter forwarded through a mutual acquaintance who had stayed in touch with her after she moved. The letter was brief, but sincere. She apologized for how she had handled the situation, acknowledged that she had been wrong to try to restrict my religious display, and admitted that she had let her desire for control override her respect for individual rights. She wrote that the experience had caused her to do a lot of soul-searching and that she had come to realize she had been too rigid and judgmental. She wished me well and hoped I could forgive her. I read the letter several times, feeling a surprising amount of emotion. It took courage to write an apology like that, especially after everything that had happened. I wrote her back, thanking her for the apology and letting her know there were no hard feelings. I told her I appreciated her honesty and wished her the best in her new home. I never heard from her again after that, but I was glad we had been able to end things on a positive note. Holding on to anger and resentment would not have helped anyone, and her apology showed personal growth that I respected. As December rolled around again, I began planning my nativity scene for the third Christmas since the whole conflict began. This time, I decided to make it a bit more elaborate. I spent weeks in my garage building a larger, stable structure with better craftsmanship. I found more detailed figures online and ordered them. I even installed some subtle ground lighting to illuminate the display at night. When I finally set it up in early December, it was far more impressive than my original modest display. Several neighbors commented on how beautiful it was, and I noticed people slowing down while driving past my house to look at it. A few families stopped with their children to admire it up close, and I always invited them into the yard to see it better. One evening, a family I did not recognize pulled up in front of my house and got out of their car. They were clearly not from the neighborhood. The father approached me nervously as I was adjusting one of the lights. "Excuse me, sir. I hope this is not weird, but we drove from Temp because someone posted a picture of your nativity scene online, and we wanted to see it in person. We have been going through a really hard time this year, and seeing displays like this reminds us what is really important. Would it be okay if we took a picture with our kids in front of it?" "Of course," I said, touched by their story. "Take all the time you need." I helped them get a good angle for the photo and chatted with them for a few minutes. They told me their youngest son had been seriously ill earlier in the year, but had recovered, and they felt particularly grateful this Christmas season. Before they left, the mother gave me a hug and thanked me for creating something beautiful that could touch people they had never even met. After they drove away, I stood in my front yard for a long time, looking at the nativity scene and reflecting on the journey I had been on. What had started as a conflict over a simple religious display had turned into something much more significant. It had taught me about standing up for principles, about the importance of community, and about how ordinary people could make a difference when they refused to be bullied. The nativity scene was not just about decoration or religious expression anymore, though it was certainly those things. It had become a symbol of freedom, of the right to be yourself and express your beliefs without fear of punishment or harassment. Every person who stopped to look at it, every family who took a picture, every neighbor who helped me set it up, they were all participating in something bigger than any of us individually. As Christmas approached, I received a call from a local television station asking if they could do a story about my nativity scene and the journey it represented. I hesitated, feeling like maybe I had been in the spotlight enough, but then I thought about all the people who had reached out over the past 2 years, all the stories of HOA harassment and people feeling powerless. If my story could help even one more person understand their rights and find the courage to stand up for them, it was worth a little more public attention. The news segment aired a few days before Christmas. It was only about 3 minutes long, but it covered the whole story from the initial HOA letter to the public apology to the community transformation that had followed. They interviewed me, Michael, and several of my neighbors. The story ended with footage of the nativity scene lit up at night, looking peaceful and beautiful. The response was incredible. My phone and email were flooded with messages of support. Several civil liberties organizations shared the story on their social media. A few national news outlets picked it up. For a brief moment, my little nativity scene in Scottsdale, Arizona, became a national symbol of First Amendment rights and the importance of standing up to overreach, even from seemingly minor authorities like HOA boards. But more important than the media attention was what happened in my neighborhood. On Christmas Eve, I looked out my window and saw something that brought tears to my eyes. All up and down my street, neighbors had put up their own religious displays. Nativity scenes, menorahs, crosses, angels, stars of Bethlehem, and more. It was not coordinated or planned. People had simply decided that they wanted to express their own faith and beliefs, knowing now that they had the right to do so. The street looked beautiful, a genuine expression of the diverse faith traditions represented in our community. And it was all because one person, me, had decided not to back down when faced with unjust restrictions. That evening, I stood in my front yard as neighbors walked by on their way to various Christmas Eve services or celebrations. Many stopped to chat, to wish me a Merry Christmas, to thank me again for what I had done. I felt a deep sense of connection to these people, a bond forged through shared struggle and ultimate triumph. As the night grew late and the street grew quiet, I sat on my porch looking at my nativity scene and thinking about everything that had happened. The journey had been stressful and difficult at times, but it had also been profoundly meaningful. I had learned that ordinary people had more power than they often realized, that constitutional rights were not just abstract concepts, but real protections that mattered in daily life, and that communities could grow stronger through adversity when people chose to stand together. The cross beside my door and the banner proclaiming "He is risen" had been there through it all, quiet reminders of the faith that had given me strength to persevere. My religious beliefs were not just something I practiced in private or within church walls. They were part of who I was, and I had every right to express them in my own home. I thought about Patricia Hennigan and her apology letter. I genuinely hoped she had found peace and had learned from our conflict. I bore her no ill will. People made mistakes, and people could grow and change. The fact that she had reached out to apologize showed character, even if it had come late. I thought about Michael and his passionate defense of First Amendment rights. Without his expertise and willingness to take on my case, things might have turned out very differently. I might have given in to the HOA's demands, removed my displays, and lived with the regret of not standing up for my beliefs. His friendship and legal support had been invaluable. Most of all, I thought about my neighbors and the community we had built together. The conflict with the HOA had revealed who people truly were. Some had shown courage in speaking up when it would have been easier to stay silent. Others had shown compassion and support when I needed it most. Together, we had transformed Sunset Ridge from a neighborhood ruled by fear of petty violations into a genuine community where people looked out for each other and respected each other's rights. As I finally headed inside for the night, I took one last look at the nativity scene, its gentle lights glowing in the darkness. The simple wooden figures of Mary, Joseph, and baby Jesus looked peaceful and serene, untroubled by all the human drama that had swirled around them. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the legal battles or the media attention or the public apologies, but the simple, profound truth that the display represented: faith, hope, and the courage to stand up for what you believe in. The next morning, Christmas Day, I woke to find a small gift bag hanging on my front door. There was no note, but inside was a wooden ornament carved in the shape of a cross with the words "Stand Firm" engraved on it. I never found out which neighbor left it, but I hung it on my Christmas tree and later gave it a permanent place in my home as a reminder of everything I had been through. The years that followed were peaceful. The revised HOA covenants worked well, balancing reasonable community standards with respect for individual rights. Richard Kellerman served as president for 3 more years before stepping down, and subsequent board members maintained the more reasonable, rights-respecting approach to governance that had been established. My nativity scene became something of a neighborhood tradition. Each December, families would make a point of walking or driving past to see it. Some years, other neighbors put up their own displays, and some years mine stood alone, but it no longer mattered. The point had been made and the precedent established. People knew their rights, and they knew the HOA would respect them. I never sought out conflict or controversy after that. I went back to being just another resident of Sunset Ridge, working my accounting job, maintaining my house, and living my quiet life. But I carried with me the knowledge that I had made a difference, not just for myself but for countless others who had been inspired by my story to stand up for their own rights. The First Amendment is not just words on old parchment. It is a living protection that requires ordinary people to defend it in their daily lives. When HOAs or other petty authorities try to restrict fundamental freedoms, someone has to be willing to say no, to stand their ground, to fight back. I am glad I was able to be that person for my community, and I am grateful for everyone who supported me along the way. My nativity scene still goes up every December, a simple expression of faith that became a symbol of freedom. And every year when I set it up, I remember the journey it took me on and the lessons I learned about courage, community, and the enduring importance of constitutional rights in America. The stable, the figures, the cross, and the banner are not just decorations. They are testaments to the principle that in this country, we have the right to express our beliefs, to practice our faith, and to live according to our convictions without fear of punishment from those who would seek to control us. That is the real story, the one that matters beyond all the legal details and media attention. It is about one person deciding that some things are worth fighting for, and discovering that when you stand up for what is right, you are never really standing alone.